Hi, my name's Kirsten Scott. I'm from Istituto Marangoni in London. My research is looking at really looking at a new movement that has emerged in recent years within fashion, a kind of subculture that's looking at the interface between anthropology, ecology, and innovation. It argues that we need a new paradigm of fashion, a new way of doing clothing, that we need this, the knowledge we need for this already exists. We're just not looking in the right places. We assume technology is going to have the answers to all the problems we face, but actually some of the answers already are there. We just don't value them in the way we should. It highlights the lessons that we can learn from indigenous textile practices and small independent practitioners about how fashion may better collaborate with nature. It looks at their incredible praxis that will reorientate us towards a future where we all might thrive. What is interesting is how traditional crafts, come to the fore at times when times of excessive consumption, and we've seen this through history, and we're experiencing a moment of this, and I hope we don't return, that it's not part of a never-ending cycle, that we learn important lessons about the need for change and how we might achieve it. The handcrafted is socially and environmentally responsive as a production method, and can help to reconnect us to the whole Earth community. So it's essential to reframe indigenous technologies as innovative rather than primitive, and to learn from these for a better future. We need a new language for fashion. Fashion is frequently described as a language, a kind of visual language. We need a new language. We need new verbs, we need new vocabulary, we need new ways of doing things. But as I say, those techniques, that knowledge already exists. So let's look at traditionally made materials, techniques and processes and forms that can articulate a way that we can live as humans in a mutually enhancing relationship with the whole Earth community. And that includes, the animate and the inanimate. How can we support a better world, a better life? We've got 10 years to prevent irreversible climate change. So just tinkering around the edges is not good enough. We need wholesale, systemic change to protect ourselves and our planet. So we need to slow down, reduce, take time to rediscover ways that have been practiced for millennia of how to grow and harvest, dye, spin, weave, knit, cut and stitch clothing that lasts, has emotional and physical durability and a positive impact. And we have to be content to stay small and shift from the paradigm of growth. So I'm talking about radical indigenism here, and radix meaning root, coming from the word root in Latin, and looking at the traditional wisdom that is rooted in global societies, global communities. The term radical indigenism was defined by Princeton academic Eva Marie Garout, and then applied more recently to design principles by architect Julia Watson. It is passed down through centuries in a community. It focuses on the local, the natural materials, and often reflects techniques that have been performed outdoors through millennia. So connection with the environment is absolute. It also really acknowledges the importance of collaboration and not appropriation. All industries, and certainly Western cultures, English-speaking cultures, have a very problematic history of interventions in other parts of the world. This is about a process of respect and collaboration. So my methods to try and understand this subculture and try and navigate a better way forward were interviews with Marcella Echevarria, Daniel Olatunji, and Oma from Oma Space, and an analysis more from secondary sources and some messaging with some other small practitioners. My own field work in Uganda, which has been going on for about 13 years, but I'm going to talk less about this because of time in this session, and my own practice as a designer, maker, and academic. So the interview with Marcela. Marcela Echevarria is based in Mexico. She describes a strong sense of gratitude for everything she has personally, for nature, for family, and for beauty in the world, and this informs her practice. It gives her enormous personal satisfaction to call attention to materials that she describes as embodiments of nature through her work in collaboration with communities of makers, as a contribution to sustaining traditional knowledge systems. Marcela started Noir Handmade as a way of honoring and promoting Chinese mud silk, which has been designated part of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity, with a 2,500-year-old history. It's dyed with a species of yam that not only turns it a rich red brown, but confers medicinal antibacterial properties to the silk and improves its durability. It's also coated with an iron-rich mud, which gives it that beautiful luminous black sheen on one side. The production of it is naturally constrained, and this is important. It is naturally constrained by seasons and farmers' other activities. It's not looking for opportunities to scale up. You know, it is naturally constrained. The shapes she designs are timeless additions. Notice the use of the word additions rather than collections. It's not about seasonal collections. And she has no intention to grow. The garments, therefore, stand in stark contrast to mainstream fashion by being developed within naturally imposed boundaries. Because Marcela appreciates the fabric so much, nothing is discarded. Many items contain elements of patchwork so that no scrap is wasted. I don't call it upcycling or recycling. I call it appreciating, she says. And part of the beauty of the fabric's found in its imperfections and inconsistencies, which she embraces consciously. She has a following of customers who collect her garments and wear them, not just because they're beautiful, but because they feel beautiful on the body. Daniel uses slow craft in every aspect of his business, rare, limited edition materials. He works with an 86-year-old Donegal tweed weaver who's the last of his family to want to learn this hand-woven technique. And he works with Fulani tribesmen in northern Nigeria, continuing a 600-year-old tradition with their indigo dyeing, as well as farming cotton around other activities and crops. It's constrained by seasons and by their other activities, and his clothes are timeless additions. He wants to grow in a very limited organic way, just to be able to transmit his way of working to others. Oma Space has an almost religious kind of approach, a very spiritual approach to her practice. We work by hand as much as we can. It has a different energy, a human spirit. And she talks about dressing the body as well as the soul with natural materials, collaborations with artisans in northern Thailand, natural dyes that change their shape, that they evolve over time and detoxify the bad energy accumulated in the body. Limited editions of handcrafted clothing, timeless and modern, processes and makers are central. She's content not to grow. This is some of the stunning work. You can see surface is really important. There's some other brands emerging. I'm not going to go into real detail about these, but it is a significant small movement that are using local, specific, relatively unmediated natural fibers and textiles that embody indigenous knowledge in their practice. They don't describe it as fashion, they describe it as clothing, which positions it outside of seasonal trends. So key findings: the fibre and the fabric are the catalyst for creative practice. They come first and foremost. The focus is on the fibre, the fabric, the way it's created. They source directly from makers, normally from small-scale artisan producers who are closely connected to their environment. They place emphasis on mutually enhancing relationships between peoples and between planet, respect for the people they work with, they collaborate with, respect for the planet and all the systems involved, the processes involved in their clothing. The source is acknowledged, it's transparent, it acknowledges and honors the maker's skill, and it supports the preservation of indigenous knowledge, keeping alive processes that have sustainably been performed for hundreds of years and from which we can learn a lot. The fibres are produced sustainably. Often the agricultural practices are regenerative and part of agroforestry systems that support other crops. They use natural dyes that carry additional beneficial properties such as antibacterial properties and other healing properties. They embrace the aesthetics of wear and imperfection. Things aren't thrown away when they start to look a bit tired. They're actually loved more. They produce limited editions that are timeless and seasonless, outside of the mainstream fashion circus. Production is naturally constrained by the seasonal availability of fibres, processes, and by the maker's other commitments. And in that way, they work very naturally within planetary boundaries. And as I said, they're not all looking to grow, they're content to stay small. And they want to make sure that their own values are embedded in every aspect of their businesses. And I wanted to end with a quote by David Orr. Ecological design is the art that reconnects us as sensuous creatures evolved over millions of years to a beautiful world. That world does not need to be remade, but rather revealed. To do that, we do not need research as much as the rediscovery of old and forgotten things. The answers we need are already out there. We just aren't looking at them properly. If you would like to know more, here are some links to my email and website and social media. And my reading for the research is a full paper, and I hope to publish a book on this subject in due course. At the moment, the research is limited by well, time. I've just begun this journey to explore these amazing design praxis. Okay, thank you. So next up then will be Elaine Rich and Marion Hallinan from Glasgow Caledonian University.
Hello.
Hi, Elaine. Sorry, I swapped you over because
oh, I'm sorry.
Prompt start.
I will share the screen.
There's a little green, if you put your cursor at the bottom of the screen, there's a little green box with an arrow. There we go. I'll say 2 minutes just before the end, so you've got a heads up, okay?
Perfect, thanks so much. I just want to say that actually this research came out prior towards COVID-19. It was collected just as the lockdown was kicking in. So it does reflect a group activity. But I suppose, you know, thinking about COVID-19 and the lockdown, we did see that there was an increase with people engaging with arts and crafts as a kind of alternative to working. It seemed that people took the time back to get to know themselves. So let me move on. So in terms of the background context to this research, even before COVID-19, reports stated in Mintel that crafting, and in particular knitting, was becoming an increasingly popular activity. And that's actually reflected in a number of groups that were held in local communities. For example, in my local area, in a few of the pubs, there were bitch and stitch groups, you know, but you know, just as a form of people coming together. But there were also more formalised tutoring knitting taking place as well. Research has illustrated that people engage with arts and crafts arts and crafts as a way to escape the busy lifestyles into which they have, because you know, as we've just heard from Kirsten, often getting back to the basics of how materials are created is a relaxing and getting back to basics kind of process. It's engaging with the clothes that you wear on an emotional level, as opposed to the consumption of goods in stores. And also, it's a reflection that many occupations are based on automated processes that are quite monotonous and don't allow people the autonomy in their positions to express themselves more fully. The increase also could be alleged to be part of the idea that fashion is so mass produced. You know, if you think about the high street in every UK and often European city, they have much the same retailers selling much the same clothes. You know, style is very kind of homogenized, and there's not a lot of differentiation within that. So by getting back to the basics and making your own clothing is a way to express your creativity and also identify with your sense of self. However, over the last couple of decades, what we have seen is that there's been a loss of skills, even the basic skills of repairing clothing, stitching on a button, or mending a seam. These are skills that are no longer taught in schools, and people have lost the ability to do that. We've also seen the mass democratization of fashion, which has meant that prices have decreased and fashion is far more affordable, and is often considered as a disposable item because it's easy to access and easy to dispose of. Globalised production has also led to homogenisation, where fashions don't tend to incorporate cultural aspects and that has led to this idea of a sense of place, that we're all trying to attain a similar global look, often referred to as Americanization, through the media that we consume. And this idea that Ritzer talks about in terms of a loss of place is of a commodity that's nothing. It's devoid of any place or humanity. And therefore, by crafting, it often locates the product in a sense of place, and also from the person that created it. So, for example, in terms of knitting, it might be a Fair Isle knitting pattern, which is located in Scotland and has got authenticity and heritage behind it. And so, in a sense, this is similar to the idea of a manufactured aesthetics emerging from the William Morris arts and crafts movement, which means that people are going back to the basics of what they are trying to engage with, and there's much more of a respect for nature and the processes that are involved in creating something. So in terms of the research, it was to examine why people came to participate in a local knitting group, because the research had said that these kind of communities often provide people with a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose. Also, because there's been such a loss of crafting skills or stitching creative skills, we wondered whether this increase, how this increase in the interest in crafts and knitting was experienced by the people that take part in it. So really we were looking to understand what the social and the emotional impact was, what kind of sense of belonging the participants had towards this crafting community, and how what these kind of purposeful effects can be provided by taking part. So the research questions were: how can crafting create a social community? What are the benefits of creative social engagement? And what are the implications for brand management and wider society? So this, the theoretical framework that underpins this research is social brand engagement, which was designed by Kozinets in 2014. And he posits that communities encourage brand engagement in order to form a relationship. And although the research is looking at the crafting aspect of this, the crafting activity took part in a local store. So it's not necessarily about a brand per se, but it's about engaging with the locality in which the activity took place. It's also looking to understand what the meaningful connection is between the consumers, that is the participants within the group, and it's looking to understand the crafted, how crafting encourages emotional and economic attachment. So we're looking at this from the quadrant of 4, how creativity comes into play in terms of innovation and co-creation between the participants. In terms of care, what the expectations are for being part of the group, in terms of the person who's delivering the activity and the others that take part in it. How they communicate with one another and influence one another's activities and relationships within the group, and how they commune together, how they just be together, and what leads on from that. So brand communities are described as a group of individuals who have a mutual interest in a brand, but in this instance we're taking the community as having a shared interest in the creative aspect of knitting. The group is self-selected, as is typical of a brand community, and they come together because they share in some way a sense of values, standards and representation, and they recognise the bonds of membership with one another in the whole. This endorses the community engagement, and it fits, it also endorses the lifestyle that fits amongst this crafting community. And so therefore the community engages not necessarily the brand ethos, but the sense of belonging that they have by taking part. So how the data was collected was taking a social constructivist epistemology, which would be trying to understand the environmental stimuli and the tactic learning and inspiration. And actually, Marion was a participant within this group. And so it was a research, kind of like an ethnographic perspective. She was involved with the group and had experienced it as a participant, and therefore sought to engage why other people remained part of that. The activity took place in an independent wool shop in the south side of Glasgow, where once a week the participants would come together to learn a specific type of knitting. So for example, it might have been the fair isle technique, it might have been finishing, so various aspects that would improve the techniques that they had from the knitting. And the shop owner, they mentioned that they felt that she was authentic within her craft because she actually had knitted for the Game of Thrones TV programme. So they felt that they were learning from someone who had great experience within this. So taking this immersive approach of Marianne being part of the group, she conducted 13 semi-structured interviews, including the owner and the participants within the group, which were audio recorded and transcribed before applying thematic. Excuse me, pardon me. The participants were aged between 20 and 70, 4 were widowed, 2 were partnered, and 6 were part of a family. 1 was single and 6 were retired. So you can see that there's actually quite a vast, these are not normal people that would come together in society to have a group. 20-year-olds mingling with 70-year-olds is, fairly unusual. And yet what Marianne found was this was a close group that didn't necessarily, I've read reports on other groups where people would go and they would sit in the same seat every week, whereas this was very fluid and very mixed. Marianne said that every time she went, she sat next to someone else and she had a very different conversation. And conversations happened around either in ones or twos or with the whole group as a whole. So the findings really, we were able to sort them into themes of create, care, communicate and commune, which aligned with Cosinet's social brand engagement theory, but we're saying that this is more of a social engagement experience that was had overall. In terms of creating, the activity became shared amongst all of them. They showed great interest in the whole knitting process and what one another was creating. And you know, I've been knitting since I was about 15, which is a long time. And very rarely does anyone show any interest in anything I'm knitting until it's, of course, finished. So the fact that to share that journey with other interested people and learn from their knowledge, experience and techniques created a closer bond between the participants within the group. They also discussed the projects that they were going to undertake, and again, that felt that they were sharing information with an interested party, and they would often get ideas about different kinds of yarns that could be used, or different techniques to improve. And from this perspective, they were generating new ideas. They were getting access to different ways of knitting and different ideas about what could be created. The group all had different levels of experience and knowledge, and they were all very keen to share that. It was a very much of a shared experience, and there was a good kind of creative flow between them. And this developed a kind of bespoke synergy between one another that they didn't have in their outside worlds. It was a place where they could go and share their knowledge and interest in this shared interest group. In terms of care, care kind of came forward in a number of different ways. For example, one of the participants says, when you're knitting something, within every stitch, it's all the love and affection that you put into it. And therefore, when you're gifting it to someone, the knitting gift, you know, it is basically the time and the effort and the care that has gone into that. But also that they felt that there was a care within the group as well, that they all wanted their projects to go well, and people were very supportive of what was happening within that. But this care wasn't just about the projects that they were working on. Care extended to, you know, listening to one another's life experiences and, you know, issues of mind. So in that sense, the community came together to share their time, but also to support one another. There was also a sense of escapism, although none of them felt obliged to attend the group. They did feel that once they got there was much to benefit from it. So this idea that there was no expectations, but, you know, perhaps if it was a rainy evening and they were cozy in the home and they would be loath to get up and go, they always felt that it was hugely worthwhile to just get out and to speak to other people, particularly those that were living on their own and often didn't see other people during their day. They also found that it was a place of calm, where the atmosphere was where nobody expected anything of them, and any contribution that they made was welcome. And from that perspective, it provided them with a sense of calm, even though for some of them that their life worlds were quite busy. You know, people who were working and had families, this was a kind of oasis that they would go to focus on themselves. And some people mentioned that it really did support their mental health well-being. Partly that was to do with being part of the group and feeling welcomed and respected within the group, but also the rhythm of the activity they found helped to manage the anxieties of the outside world. And again, the care was illustrated in support for the knitting projects, which included motivation to finish it, feelings of accomplishment because other people were respectful of the work that they'd put together or the techniques that they'd used, and they understood what was involved in knitting it. And often they came together to do knitting for charity. They were knitting blankets for refugees and also baby clothes for refugees as well. So the care, the care that they respected one another with, and the care that they put into their arts, they were keen to extend that within the locality. In terms of
sorry, 2 minutes, Elaine.
Sorry. In terms of communication, they really, I've got some quotes here. They said that, you know, people who go to these groups, they're all the same. They want to be friendly. You go there to meet people, and that's what they go to. And one of them said that, you know, at my age, there's not many opportunities you can get to speak to like-minded others unless you join a church. But if that's not, you know, where you're orientated and you want to meet someone on an interest group, then this is it. And you can see here that someone else said that they were very united with their husband, and once he died, they felt at a loss, and the group offered an opportunity to go out and speak to others. And this was particularly important because it did cross these generational spans where they were getting to meet people from different generations. And this is the group, the shop here. It's called the Wool Haven, which is quite apt for the way that it offered a haven of peace for the people that wanted to take part of it. And they respected that the owner provided the space and the atmosphere and the welcoming and the support for the knitting as a craft within that. So they felt that the shop facilitated that, and actually that made them more likely to browse the high street, to go down and to shop more locally, because they really did appreciate that they were getting a whole different experience by being in the shop and talking to someone with knowledge than say that they would have if they were shopping online. So it did give them a pride in the locality, and they said that it was good that shops were being used to create community feelings as opposed to being closed. And it did offer a kind of 5-minute blether, as one of the participants said. So the implications and concluding comments are that our data exhibits these similar aspects of emotions, which were captured within CausiNet's social brand engagement theory, but it was through a consumer lens or a society lens rather than a branding perspective, that it does extend commodity consumption to experiential brand consumption. So it wasn't just the store that kind of pulled them in, it was that aspect of community and the way that that was created by those that owned it. There was an oasis of calm. It led them to be more community minded, that they wanted to engage with the community much more. And this included them feeling that they wanted to give as well as receive. So giving to others in the group, and also giving to charity as well. So it does kind of advance our knowledge of this theoretical framework, and it does provide an alternative lens rather than a kind of consumerist lens to view it through. And it does have implications, particularly if more people are engaging with crafting post-pandemic, having enjoyed the experience during the lockdown. And also there are opportunities to engage more on social media. So for example, people were making masks for others and for charities, and they were sharing images of their handiwork, and these are opportunities that can only grow. So thank you for listening. Here are my references, and I'd be happy to take any questions at the end of this session.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Very interesting.
You're welcome.
Next up, we have Liliana Pina, Paulo Duarte, Jose Lucas, Paulo Martins, and Rui Miguel from the University of Beira Interior. Is anyone there from that group? Anyone here from that group? So Pina et al. Are next. Okay, it looks like they might not be here. I can see in the list of names, Jose Martinez. It's not Jose Martinez Lucas, is it? Okay, I think we might need to go to the question and answer section then. If they turn up in the next couple of moments, then we can cut to their presentation. But in the absence of that, are there any questions? Yes, all the panel, all the speakers so far have their screens on. That would be awesome. And then no questions coming up from the audience yet. Elaine, I would like to ask you then, where are you going to go with this project? What are your plans for the next steps?
Well, I think it would be interesting to see what happens post, COVID-19, whether that's something that is sustainable. But also, I think it'd be maybe nice to kind of look at other types of groups as well. I know that there's most of my research is on sustainable fashion, and I know that there's within. I live in Edinburgh, and between Edinburgh and Glasgow, there are a number of different sustainable workshops, and it would be good to engage with why people participate in trying to upcycle their clothing as well, and what they gain from that.
Right. Thank you. Sorry, I'm slightly distracted by comments coming in. So Aude Le Guenec has a question for you. Aude, you can put your
Hi.
mic on.
Hi Aude, how are you?
Yeah, hi. It's cool to see you here. I've studied the patchwork groups in rural areas in France, which have been really trendy over the 90s, 2000s, and are mostly attended by women around 40, 50 years old. So I would be happy to share that with you and a few info if you wanted to. Obviously, it's a completely different context, but that can be interesting for you. And also, I was thinking during your presentation, there's grannies group which are hired by children's fashion companies, but you might be aware about it, to create hand knitted garments which are then sold by these brands. I don't have the names here in mind, but it might be a good idea to look at that, because obviously the concept of nostalgia is something that they are quite keen to develop in their collection. So
absolutely,
thank you so much for your presentation. And
thank you, that's really good. Yeah, I'll catch up.
Claudio has a question. Claudio, do you want to say it, or do you want me to read it out?
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
I'm very happy to see everybody here, and congratulations for this realization. It's very hard to do this way, but I think it's very good. It's very nice to see new research. And yes, I think this question of ecology and thinking about a new system beyond our own humans reality. I think every animal in the world are liking this situation instead us. And yes, I'd like to ask you, how can we prepare consumers, or if they are prepared for these imperfections and variations? Because I worked with a project here in Brazil and at Amazon, working with rubber, natural rubber. And the problem is that this material is alive and it changes. So we need to care about the material, like a baby. So how can we change this very deep knowledge about material behavior, that it needs to be homogeneous and resistant and so on? So
I don't have a magic wand, but I do think that it probably comes down to education and starting very young. Unfortunately, we've only got 10 years before we have to make, before it's too late almost. So what can we do now? In language that younger consumers will understand, I think finding the right influences, I kind of detest that concept, but finding the right influencers might be a helpful strategy in getting the communication out there, getting those, trying to instill that appreciation in young people. It's a combination of education, the right role models, the right platforms. And I wonder if COVID has given us an opportunity to rethink. I mean, I'm still figuring this out myself, so I can't pretend to have all the solutions. You know,
Yeah.
your work sounds super interesting, by the way. And this is the thing, isn't it, with these incredible natural materials that we don't mess around with much. It's almost straight from the tree to the body, perhaps, or the wall, or the however you use the material. How do we, I mean, it's that and helping people to understand that it's that they forge a deeper connection with the natural world, that it's putting nature upon us, and we sort of becoming, we are nature, we're part of nature, we're part of a natural world, but reminding people of this. So yeah, education, the right role models, the right platforms to showcase the work and what it really means, you know, in a deeper way. But it's something we all have to work through together and try and find solutions to.
I did some research previously on perceptions of sustainable products, and actually the people that bought into them really liked the fact that they were buying a second life, and the imperfections were part of that. So for example, someone had bought a handbag made of recycled plastic cartons, and someone else had bought Christmas decorations that were made from repurposed, I think it was pineapple waste. And so, you know, the characteristics, they weren't seeking something that was perfection. What they were doing was buying something that had a second life and thinking that that was a novel approach, not only to sustainability, but by saying to people, oh, in a previous life, that was a pineapple.
That's a good point. And also that thing, it's becoming cool to mend stuff again, and to almost seeing that mending as a badge of honor rather than something that perhaps in the past people would have tried to hide. So you have people like Celia Pym who are making a feature of their darning, and it adds to the beauty rather than detracting from it. And it's the kind of wabi-sabi feeling that Daniel Olatunji embraces in his work too, but celebrating the imperfect, showcasing it, and just, yeah, showing it in the right way for what it is, honoring the processes, is a powerful communication. It's just this, people are hearing so much of the other, and they're conditioned to think that when something looks old or tired, they need to replace it. And there's almost built-in obsolescence. I would say that trends are a built-in obsolescence that the fashion industry creates to force us to buy more stuff if we want to be seen as relevant. And the movement I was talking about is really standing in firm opposition to this.
Yes, and maybe connecting with Eliane research, maybe we need to restart new ways of production.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, connect new ways to, well, bring us products through another personal connection with production, you know, because now we have this work as a pain and not as a sense of community, protection, and change experience. So it's amazing how can we do things together with other intention, and maybe through that we can already create products, and with this change, a human change, and another level, not as so here with the hierarchy. I'm sorry about that.
Oh.
And that it's a very beautiful horizon that we can see here, and we need to try and we need to bring this to maybe economic. It's the right word, because we have an echo in the beginning, and we need to try this new way of create possibilities for us. Or maybe we can expect to continue here and using a digital fashion solution for our identities, because if we stay here like with no social context, but I think social context is so important for our emotions.
Absolutely.
And so I believe that fashion in this way will continue, because we need to touch, like Georgina is worried about the touch through fashion. It's very important, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a second skin, isn't it?
Absolutely. I can see Matilda has a question.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
It's all very strange. I really loved the talks. Thank you so much. And what I wanted to discuss was the idea of perfection. You know, we come from a society where you go into a big store and everything's exactly the same. We're very, very used to a high level of standard of manufacturing. And I've noted from my own research that when I've looked at handmade garments, both past and vintage garments, you know, going back to the 18th century right up to kind of the 80s, that there is an imperfection. People weren't needing such a high standard. We're so used to this, you know, the workers, all the globalized workforce, they have to meet very high product standards at every stage. You know, they're very skilled. How, as society, going to move away from this idea of what's perfect and what's not? This idea of, because I mean, you know, we're all preaching to the converted here, really, because I understand everything that you're saying, and I particularly love the designers that you showed, Kirsten. I thought they were so beautiful. But what about the people who are skint, who can only afford to buy mass-produced clothing?
Yeah.
What about the people who can't go, you know, wool is expensive, nice wool's expensive. I mean, acrylic's not expensive, but what about that lot, that huge section of the population? How are we going to shift this thing? I mean, how are we? It's massive topic, but I just, those thoughts really always come to me. And so I can see how the circular economy is now really gaining momentum, because I don't know, I never used to think that was the way to go, but now I'm wondering if it is. Anyway, I'm just intrigued, just throwing this out there.
Yeah. For me, I'd say, first of all, yes, there's a huge issue with democratizing slow fashion, sustainable fashion, making it affordable for people on lower incomes. I completely agree. And one thing I'd put out there, first of all, it's the quantity of stuff we buy. We overproduce and we overconsume. We don't need to. So it's about a shift in mindset there. Another factor is, look at the industries that are damaging, that we subsidize, that our governments subsidize. What about subsidizing, what about taxing those more and subsidizing the things that actually contribute, that are doing things in a genuinely sustainable way? You know, it could become a level playing field, certainly within fashion. If we pay what something is really worth, paying the workers the right amount, making sure working conditions are right at every step of the way.
So it's a political. So we need some political representation, like proper voices in the higher echelons to say, no, we are going to pay Bangladesh people in Bangladesh and Myanmar the wages they didn't get from cancelled orders.
Yeah,
I agree. It's very complicated, isn't it?
it is. There's education, there's politics, there's individual responsibility as well.
And before Elaine, look, I have just finished knitting my new nephew a jumper while we speak. I've got to sew the buttons on and do a little embellishment. Thank you.
Can I just check? Oh, wow. Another lovely Emily Brayshaw as well. I love that people are knitting whilst they're listening to the session. That's so great. I just want to check that no one from the other group has shown up, because there was a fourth group and it seems that that group, so there's Liliana Pina, Paulo Duarte, Jose Lucas, Paulo Martins and Rui Miguel from University of Beira Interior in Portugal. It seems like no one's here from that group, because otherwise let's carry on talking, but I would hate to think that we've, you know, or maybe I've stopped them from presenting their research if they're here. But quite mysterious that they're not. Maybe they're in a different group. Okay, any other, it seems not. So any other questions? I wonder if, I wonder too how you take in information whilst you're knitting. There's something about freeing one part of the brain so the other part can respond to what you hear on a deeper level, perhaps. You know, it's that left brain, right brain dynamic, I guess. I think there's, well, I'm just asking generally because I know there's at least 2 people who've been knitting during this session, which I love. I think we should all be knitting in sessions.
Since Zoom, since the pandemic, I do a lot of work online and I either draw or I knit. And I find it much easier than just staring at the screen and listening. I can listen and do creative things. That's just me. It's very relaxing.
I think that's it. It's the rhythm of it, isn't it? It does tend to relax you and give you a sort of sense of focus and calm things down. I'm dyslexic and my attention span is all over the place, but there's something about knitting that kind of pulls me forward to, you know, to compose myself.
The calming that you mentioned in your paper, in fact.
Yeah, that whole kind of rhythm of, in particular if you're not doing something that's overly complex, but you know, if it's just a kind of basic knit, then it is, and also when it is more complex, you do get into a rhythm with that as well. So I do think it's really, I do find it calming.
I remember reading a paper once by somebody Araujo, a Brazilian researcher, and she was talking about the rhythm of weaving, and that the word, something about the word for weaving in ancient Greek related to the word for cosmos, and it was about instilling order. There's something about that that creates a sense of order, which I need to see if I can find that again, but it does give a sense of everything's fine, it's okay, and then your brain can travel and wander and absorb. Or
absolutely, and I think it's quite to see the growth of something is quite positive as well. You know, it feels there's a sense of achievement when you've finished a piece of work.
Yeah, I need to dig out my needles and go buy some wool or unravel a jumper. Maybe is probably the best way forward. I took the Extinction Rebellion fashion pledge in February and haven't bought anything new this year. So I guess I could, but that's the great thing with knitting, you can unravel endlessly, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and repurpose, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, all the speakers today. It's a shame we didn't hear from the other group, but well, thank you everyone for attending. If there aren't any more questions, then I think we should probably disband now. Yes, doodling is also good. We should disband now, ready for the next session, having a quick coffee break before the next session.